only thing in the world you don't know is the only new thing in the world is the history you don't know. I'm a great believer in studying history. I think we understand where we came from. But it is a new world. I think in many ways it's a promising new world. And the hope is the Boston Global Forum, with the help of all of you, can make a contribution to the kind of peaceful resolution, not just of the immediate issues, but a process and a framework in which peace and security is guaranteed for the long run. In the Pacific and, by the way, in other parts of the world. Now, we're very fortunate to have those very good as we've had in our past conferences. Just starting with Michael Fuchs, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the world, I think in many ways in the East Asian and Pacific Bureau. I'm also joined here in Boston, not only by Tuan Nguyen, but not just the immediate issue, but the process of creating the Bogo, who's a professor emeritus, I guess you are, both at this point, deeply and actively involved in other parts of the world. And we're very fortunate to have these very generally back on the other side. Starting with Michael Fuchs, who's the Anton Patterson, Kennedy School, and somebody I've known and admired for a long time. He's very much a part of the forum since we started. But I want to turn first to Deputy Assistant Secretary Fuchs, and Mike, if you could give us just a State Department perspective at this point on this, and maybe some suggestions as to how you think the Boston Global Forum can help in a very constructive way.
Sure. Well, first, thank you, Governor Dukakis, and I want to also thank the Boston Global Forum for convening this discussion. I think it's very timely, important, and I'm glad that you were able to organize such a great group of folks to discuss this very timely and important subject. I think that, I could go on for a little while and explain the USG view of our policy in the region, what we think is going on in the region right now. We, as a government, have made a sort of renewed commitment to engage with the region, the U.S. rebalance to the Asia-Pacific, begun by the Obama administration, which has a number of different lines of effort. And the most, I think, fundamental point here for us is that we have renewed our focus on the region very much in part because of some of the issues that you were pointing out, Governor Dukakis, because we see so much going on in the region, economic dynamism that's happening in the region, but also some of the challenges and threats we see to peace and stability and prosperity in the region, some of which you mentioned opening. So that, I think, sparked a very strong renewed interest for us, is that we have renewed our focus on the entire cause, also just about to keep Governor Dukakis, because we see so much going on in the region, economic dynamism that's happening in the region, but also some focus on multilateral institutions. It has been, again, a key focus for U.S. policy in the last few years, and which I think we believe very strongly has the potential, at least in the coming years and decades, to be a key pillar of enabling the countries in the region to address the issues that you were talking about at the very beginning, whether it's maritime disputes, non-proliferation, or other threats to peace and stability in the region. Obviously, there are a wide variety of focus for U.S. policy, thus any one of them in particular. But we've focused really in the last few years on strengthening our engagement and strengthening the institutions themselves with all of them, starting with ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and its affiliated groups, the ASEAN Regional Forum, the East Asia Summit, and the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus. And we believe that these institutions, while right now, I think, in a growth stage, have a lot of attention. The foreign ministers, the leaders of all the countries in the region annually invest time and energy in engaging in these forums. And so these are the right places, I think, for us to come together as a region to try to tackle the key problems. So I just mentioned two things. We believe that these institutions can be helpful in addressing some of the issues that you, Governor Dukakis, were putting on the table at the beginning in two different ways. First, it's by providing simply a forum for frank and open dialogue on the key issues. Obviously, as we know, we can't take for granted the fact that dialogue itself is incredibly important.
I'm sorry. I have to interrupt. Well, I just cannot, who is talking? I don't know who is talking.
The Mike from the Washington, D.C.?
Michael Fuchs from
Mike Fuchs from the U.S. State Department.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we hear several voices at the same time, and we cannot follow your story.
Obviously, as we know, we can't take for granted that dialogue itself is incredibly important.
I'm sorry. I have to interrupt.
Yeah. I think we have.
Who's talking? I don't know who's talking.
Yeah. I think we have several. No.
Michael Fuchs from
Mike Fuchs from the U.S. State Department.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, that's
we
it.
hear
Great. Is that better? All right. Great. Well, I won't start again, but maybe just I'll wrap up with 2 points on the multilateral institutions, which again I think is the main point I wanted to get across. In addressing these tough challenges in the region, whether again maritime disputes, non-proliferation, or anything else, we need a multilateral framework to be able to help deal with these problems. And we see investing in these regional institutions, especially ASEAN and the ASEAN-related institutions, as important for two main reasons. First is that they provide a natural forum for frank and open dialogue amongst all the relevant countries in the region. And again, as I mentioned before, you have investments in these institutions from the highest levels of all the governments in the region, from the foreign ministers all to the presidents and leaders of these countries. And so for that very reason, this is a natural place, I think, for everyone in the region to come together, put on the table the key issues that are at stake here, and agree to come to the table with ideas and solutions and frank views on how best to address these issues. That's the first point. The second point is that as we build up these institutions over the long run, they also need to be capable of taking on and implementing practical cooperation in key areas. So once institutions identify key substantive areas and challenges for discussion, they need to also be able to come up with ideas, and if not solutions to the problems themselves, then at the very least come up with practical mechanisms for cooperation so that countries and relevant officials and individuals and agencies from governments across the region can come together in a key area and find ways to practically cooperate with one another. The maritime space, again, is a prime example of this, and there are a number of different things that we're doing with a number of countries in the region to build capacity in the countries and to bring together maritime law enforcement agencies, militaries, defense establishments, civilian officials, and so forth, to build habits of cooperation in the maritime space, to build trust, and to build, again, sort of this dialogue amongst those officials dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis, which, again, I think is a necessary part of addressing these issues over the longer term. So I know that we have limited time here today, so let me perhaps stop there and turn it back over to you, Governor Dukakis.
Mike, thanks so much. Ez Vogel, I know you know of, and who's an old friend and an old hand at this, is with me. And I wonder as whether you might have some thoughts and maybe some questions of Mike in connection with all of this, because I know you're heading for the fairly soon, and
Well, what I think
Okay.
I know what you're trying to do today is to get issues on the table.
Right.
And I thought what I might do is to sort of lay out what I think are sort of the issues that this group could work with.
And see if you can do that in a way that the way that Rick has said,
Yes,
so that
I will. I think there's so many things going on actually between all the countries, and the State Department has an extraordinary number of activities, and now there are tremendous numbers of exchanges in all kinds of areas. But I think the broad ranges of issues that we are confronted with, I'll put it in 5 different issues. The first is how we can think now of avoiding things blowing up. And there are a lot of people working on this that have understandings between the Chinese and the Vietnamese and the Filipinos and the Japanese and the Americans about things to do to avoid accidents, and whether we can't find ways to get off the tense situation where we are now, to get both sides to pull back a little. That's one range of issues. The second thing is the tensions, since the tensions are not going to go away, how we deal with the practical issues that our State Department friend Mike was talking about. How do we deal with the issues of keeping up economic relations? How do we keep up concern with global environment issues? How do we work on health issues, natural disasters, the whole range of issues, the practical issues that Mike was talking about? How do we keep those going despite the tensions? Number 3, how do we resolve some of the big issues that have to do with the ownership? Are there some ways that we could get one side or another to go to the International Court of Justice, or are there certain principles that we can put in motion that would at least get agreement to put things on the shelf for a long period of time to resolve those issues? Fourth, I think we need a vision of a new structure in Asia. The structure we've had, the Cold War is over. The United States is not going to have as much strength as we had in the past to dominate the globe. China is going to have a bigger role. And from the Chinese point of view, it's intolerant to have foreign planes and foreign ships come right up to their borders. It's intolerant to have to put up with the Taiwan division. We have to come up with a new structure that is realistic over the 5 to 10 year framework. That is something that provides security and provide a balance between particularly the United States and China, but some of the other countries in the region provide long-term stability. And fifth, I think we have to find ways to deal with the emotional issues on the side that have to do with history. The Japanese, I think, need to do a great deal more to explain in a broad way the problems that they created through their imperialism and through World War II. They have admitted their difficulties, and others need to recognize that the Japanese have done that. Other countries have historical problems too. But the Japanese particularly need to do a great deal to educate their public to show greater sensitivity to the issues and the problems that they have caused. The Chinese need to do a great deal so that they show an understanding in the Chinese people of all the contributions that Japan has made Chinese modernization in the early part of the 20th century and in the 1980s, and the Koreans, it's the same way. So those are the broad range of issues that I see that people like us from the outside who try to help and frame the issues and help mobilize opinion and thinking. Those are the range of issues that I see.
Mike suggested, and Mike, I'd like you to come back into this with us. Mike suggested that ASEAN was one of those institutions which might be an ongoing
well, ASEAN
forum of discussion. What do you think?
I think ASEAN is a great forum for discussion. It doesn't have its own troops. It's not sufficiently united that it's going to be like Europe. We can't expect to play that role. But I think ASEAN has been a wonderful forum for discussing and getting the big powers to meetings to discuss the major issues. And it's sufficiently neutral. The Chinese don't have to feel that the United States is going behind it or Japan is behind it. It's sufficiently neutral, although now there is a new tension between particularly Philippines and Vietnam over the Chinese issues. But it's still it's a wonderful area and locale for having those discussions.
Mike, can you talk to us a little bit about that? I mean, as we look ahead, I mean, is that the regional institutional organization which you see as the place where over time we can develop this framework that we're talking about? Where is the UN in all of this? Can you talk to us a little bit about these?
APEC too.
And APEC as well. Where are these institutions? How do you see this playing out over the course of the next 4, 5, 6, 8 years? Mike, are you there? Yeah. Hold on. We see you, but we're not hearing you.
Okay.
You're on.
Well, good morning. My name is Yanai. I'm the president of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. But I'm not talking in that capacity. I'm talking in my individual capacity. And it's nice to see you, Professor Vogel. You remember me?
Yes.
I was in the Foreign Office for many years, and I'm former ambassador to the United States. And I was very much involved in Asian affairs. Mr. Dukakis, I know your name, but it's the first time that I see you, and I'm very nice to meet you. I think I was not able to follow the beginning of your talks because there was some technical problem. But I think you are talking about possible institutions in Asia to build up confidence. And I was very much involved in the ASEAN Regional Forum, which is not just ASEAN, but the United States, Japan, Russia, and some other countries are also members. That is one institution. And to a limited extent, I think it contributed to enhance the trust among states concerned. But it has not been very successful. Another forum, there are other forums such as APEC, which is more limited to economic matters. But of course, economic exchanges can enhance confidence among states. I was also involved in trilateral track 2 or track 1.5 process among the United States, Japan, and Russia. And we also tried the same thing between Japan, China, and the United States. I don't know what happened to those institutions, but perhaps in addition to a big forum like ASEAN Regional Forum, perhaps trilateral forums like that among major players in the Asia-Pacific region could be useful to build up confidence in this region. So perhaps you may have a better idea, but that is some comments I wanted to make based on my own experience.
Thank you. I think that's Rock next to you, right?
Well, thank you very much, Governor Dukakis. Well, now I pretty much agree with former ambassador to United States, and we are talking at the Japanese end, trying to establish some kind of institution to get all the major players in to build the trust among the China and the ASEAN countries and Japan. Well, I'm not sure what kind of form, what kind of function this type of institution will take. However, it is very clear we have to have some kind of institution to resolve the differences. Because one of the things, I don't know exactly about why China has become very assertive in recent years. Well, I really don't understand, what it's a matter of the leadership or it's a matter of the domestic problems. Well, I'm not sure about that. But however, it is very clear we have to have some kind of mutual trust building organization in this region. Otherwise, that just little things click that trigger of accidentally lead to more escalation of conflicts. I'm really worried about that. And also, maybe it is a greater idea to have many different fronts of mutual trust building. Maybe business people, scholars, even the students. It's a long run, strategy. However, it is important, to pursue long run strategy as well as the short run institutional response to the problem. Thank you very much.
If I may, just a few more words to what I said earlier. I talked about trilateral forum between Japan, United States, and the Soviet Union in those days during the Cold War period. And also, I talked about trilateral forum between Japan, China, and the United States. But I refer to 1.5 track. That means that even government officials or even military people participate in that kind of consultations in private capacity. Because if you participate representing your own government, you're bound by your government's instructions. So to give certain flexibility to participants, it's useful for participants to make statements or launch ideas in a private capacity. But at the same time, if the governments concerned are not involved, then nobody can carry out any policy. So it's good to have both government representatives and private people. And even government representatives are allowed to make statements or make proposals as individuals. So that is what I mean by 1.5 track.
Can I ask you both this question, though? It didn't seem to me that the Japanese Prime Minister's announcement yesterday
Yes. Yes.
to multilateral decision-making. On the contrary, it seemed to me it suggested that the answer to the problem was more military alliances.
Well, I chaired the panel of experts which presented a report to Prime Minister Abe. And the panel started its work 7 years ago. And then Mr. Abe stepped down. but he came back to the administration. So he resumed this process. So I chaired the panel twice. And in May, we presented the second report to Prime Minister Abe, in which we proposed to change, to some extent, the interpretation of Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, because the past interpretation was too restrictive, and according to which, although Japan has the right of collective self-defense, the Japanese although Japan has the right of collective self-defense under international law, according to the old interpretation, the Japanese Constitution, especially Article 9, does not allow Japan to exercise this right of collective defense. So the main idea is that we should have reliable Japan-US alliance. And in order to do that, Japan has to contribute more to the strengthening of the alliance. And in order to do that, we think, the panel thinks that Japan has to revise the interpretation of Article 9 so that Japan can exercise the right of collective self-defense. For instance, under the old interpretation of Article 9, if there is any conflict, or if the United States and Japan are acting together, and if somebody or some country attacks for instance, a U.S. Navy ship, and if Japan's Navy ship is nearby, if Japan is not attacked, Japan is not allowed to help the U.S. Navy under attack. So that is not really acceptable. So in order to strengthen our alliance, we propose that the exercise of collective self-defense has to be allowed under the Constitution. And we think that that can be done. So yesterday, Mr. Abe, the Abe administration accepted some of our ideas, not the whole thing, but some of the ideas, to relax the too restrictive interpretation of the Constitution. And in that cabinet decision, it was proposed that a series of laws concerning security or the self-defense forces should be revised to strengthen the self-defense capability, and also to strengthen the alliance between Japan and the United States.
Yeah,
and that is to enhance the capacity to prevent conflict. So that is to enhance deterrence, to prevent disputes from deteriorating. So that is the idea.
Mike, speaking
I'd like to add a comment here.
Yesterday, I can't, from a personal standpoint, it didn't seem to me that that was contributing to this goal of creating a framework for peace and security in the Pacific. What's the State Department's take on this, and where do we go from here with the kind of institution building that you were talking about?
Mike, you're muted, so you have to unmute yourself.
particular issue.
He needs to be
All right.
unmuted.
Hey. All right. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. So, getting with respect to your question, Governor, I think that we do believe very much, to your earlier question, that the ASEAN-centered institutions, in particular when it comes to the political and security issues, are the places to invest time and energy in the region when it comes to a multilateral framework for dealing with these issues. I also agree that, frankly, in some ways, the more the merrier when it comes to institutions, trilateral mechanisms, and other fora for dealing with specific issues. I think those are all to the good. I think that obviously our administration has made a huge investment in APEC on the economic front. The Trans-Pacific Partnership itself is a negotiation that came out of APEC discussions. And in APEC itself, there have been a number of significant, I think, advances on the environmental front and other fronts as well. But in the political security realm, again, I think ASEAN is the top game in town when it comes to being a structured organization that has political buy-in. And again, I agree with Professor Vogel that there may be imperfections with ASEAN and the ASEAN institutions, but they themselves are united, have common goals, and again, they have the political buy-in, I believe, from not just the 10 countries of ASEAN, but from all the rest of the countries in the region as well, from us, Japan, China, Australia, and all the other big countries and others around the neighborhood. And so I think that for that very reason alone, that again, you've got political buy-in, you've got political buy-in at the highest levels. And in particular, I'd note the East Asia Summit, which is a relatively new forum that's created out of ASEAN just in the last 8-9 years. But just in the last 2 to 3 years, you've had participation from the leader level, the United States, as well. And so we think, again, Governor Dukakis, you mentioned the timeline of, next 4, 5, 6, 8 years out. I would say in that time frame, but honestly also beyond that. I mean, we're talking about a long-term effort here, where results are sometimes slow. But if we're going to make headway, I think, on any of these issues that you're talking about in a structural way, in a long-term and lasting way, I think that what we need to do is build on these institutions. And a number of them already exist, from the East Asia Summit to the ASEAN Regional Forum. There are other institutions, again, that are very new, that are being created to handle more specific issues with the same membership. There is something called the Expanded ASEAN Maritime Forum, which has the membership of the East Asia Summit, which handles specifically maritime security and cooperation related issues. Also, as I mentioned before, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, which is defense establishments and militaries getting together to discuss things like humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And so, from our view, yes, the answer simply is yes. That these are the places where time and energy should be spent trying to create a framework to address the more complicated issues in the region. But it will take time, I think.
Well, clearly this is one of the topics that we ought to really get into when we have our August conference and subsequent meetings, Mike. But thank you so much for being a part of this, and I hope we can keep you deeply and actively involved in this, because it's so important. Really, we have somebody in Chicago who has joined us, and I'd like him to introduce himself and then comment on what he's heard and maybe some of the suggestions he has as we move forward now in dealing with this very important topic. Go ahead.
Thank you, and I'd like to first of all introduce myself. I'm also a former ambassador. I spent most of my career in Europe, and of the 5 issues that Ezra has pointed out, the emotional issues are very important, and reconciliation probably is the fundamental issue to address the others that come. But I'd like to take Mike's point about what we could do in the Boston Global Forum, and that is, what kind of forum would make sense? Would make sense to bring together in a longer period of time. What Mike talks about in the government certainly is capable of working with the institutions he's talked about. how do you build support for those institutions, for those structures over a longer period of time? I would argue that would be probably the best thing that we could do is to convene the right people at the next level down, speaking as the ambassador from Japan noted, on a personal basis, to address issues over a longer period of time. For instance, bringing in businessmen, academics, government officials to address specific issues in maritime issues or reconciliation issues or environmental issues, national cooperations, so that you would have with all of the partners that you would find, that is the business interests, the academic interests, as well as the regional issues, regional interests at the table. This is a very successful model that we used in Berlin at the Aspen Institute office in Berlin for years. We had a 2-year project with 15 people of a diverse group of people and a separate other group of people working over the years. And frankly, those of us were mid-level officers at the time, went on to be those people going to the meetings that Mike has talked about, going to the meetings in the Defense Department, going to the meetings at ASEAN and the East Asian Summit. By the time we get to those positions of decision, we had actually developed relationships between various Europeans and with the Russians as well, so that you build the issues and contribute at the same time to the people you're working for. That is, if you choose the right people, they will advise as informally or formally what the discussions are happening at the next level down. This kind of forum, I think, is something that Boston Global Forum could really contribute in this track 2 or track 1.5 method that has been very effective with the East-West Center in New York, as well as others. My actual most recent conflict resolution and conflict management has been dealing with the reconciliation issues of World War II. I was the negotiator, the ambassador for Holocaust issues or forced labor from World War II, unpaid insurance claims, and such Nazi confiscated art, as well as the negotiator for blood diamonds, for banning the use of diamonds to finance rebels in Africa. Those kinds of efforts really only work if you have the business community, civil society, and others in that discussion, not necessarily in the negotiations, that's not what governments like, but have them in the discussion. The same can be said in my most recent discussions on the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the president of the Japan-America Society here in Chicago. Having a civil society or having an open dialogue with the people who are not in the negotiation but have concerns and interests is very important. That, I think, in bringing those interests around a forum that Mike has suggested that has the participation of not the most senior, but those people who have access to the senior people in their companies, in the governments, and in academia, that we can actually make a difference.
That's very helpful, Mr. Ambassador, and I hope you'll stay with our discussions as we go forward. Now, I think we have somebody from Vietnam who will be also making a contribution. You would introduce yourself from Vietnam and tell us who you are and give us your comments as well. That would be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, please.
She has to be unmuted. Her microphone is muted.
Can you talk to the computer? Okay, I unmuted you. Can you talk?
Hello, everyone. It's our pleasure to join with this online conference, and I felt that because it's not so good to hear all the ideas, but I found they are so interesting. And one thing I just wonder, I think that this initiative is a great idea, and we understand that the problem now that there's a lack of trust, mutual trust among the South China Sea claimants But what we observe now, I think that this initiative cannot work if we cannot engage China in those forums. And you know, as someone mentioned, that there are a lot of multilateral forum initiatives, such as the ASEAN Regional Forum and the East Asia Summit. But the problem for China now that they let do the IRIC to do the talking. They refuse to talk to anyone. They just use the telecoercion against Vietnam. So I just wonder, how can we engage China into that and to to improve the enforcement and to enforce, to push China to to follow the UN clause and to international laws. And another thing, we in Vietnam, we are care more about what role the United States can play in this issue, because for us, we think that if the United States just the United States mentioned a lot about the U.S. pivot, about the rebellion strategy, but with this replacement in Vietnam, that now we raise much of concerns and doubts about the visibility and the reliability of the U.S. pivot. If the United States just mention about the U.S. pivot, but no reaction, and you cannot do anything to stop the China from bad behavior. That is very bad for the regional countries, and you send a very negative message to the regional countries about the U.S. rebellion strategy. So I love to hear more ideas from the Mr. Governor Michael Dukakis and from my first about the U.S. government and how this forum can engage more the United States government in this forum. Thank you so much.
Mike, how do we get China more deeply involved in multilateral?
Yes.
They seem to much prefer this bilateral stuff, and I think the consensus that we've heard, and certainly it comes from you, is that if we're going to resolve these problems, it has to be because all of these nations and their leaders participate. Is there any indication that China is prepared to do that in a way that we haven't seen up until this time?
Well, again, as I said, I think that this is a long-term effort, and I think that the multilateral piece is an essential piece of it, but it's not the only piece. But when it comes to the multilateral piece, which I'll stick to for the moment, there are a couple of points. First is China is at the table, right? And I think that that's one of the most important aspects to this, which is that you want China, along with everybody else in the region, to be at the table for these discussions. The idea behind EAS and ARF and the rest of them is that you take rules of the road, internationally recognized norms and laws, and you try to find ways to apply them to specific issues in the region. And so I think that there are a few things. When it comes to the territorial disputes, as our colleague was just talking about, there are a few different things. One, I think, is that first and foremost, the countries of the region and the claimants in the South China Sea, as well as all of ASEAN, have agreed, including China, to negotiate a code of conduct in the South China Sea. Now, those negotiations are going very, very slowly, but I do think that the multilateral place, again, already has agreement from China, not to mention the other countries, that this is the mechanism, one of the main mechanisms through which we must deal with this issue. And so I think that the multilateral fora can play a couple of different roles here. One is, I think that they can, again, provide the venue for that practical discussion that, frankly, needs to move a lot quicker. The second is that I think China needs to hear from the entire region that this is an issue that everyone has a stake in. This has been the position of the United States for a long time now, that we have a national interest in how these disputes are addressed, and so do the other countries in the region, and they have also made very clear publicly to China and to everyone that we all have a stake in how these issues are addressed, because they do get to those broader questions that we've been discussing of regional stability and security. And so I think that one of the main roles for the multilateral fora here, with, again, China at the table along with everyone else, is to make this point very clear. But it needs to come from everybody. And so I think that's one of the primary roles that these institutions can play in, again, bringing China, and again, they're at the table, and helping them, along with everyone, understand that this is something that affects everybody in the region and needs to be addressed. And so, again, each meeting is another opportunity to have that discussion, to get that point across, and again, to foster some of the cooperative solutions that, frankly, are on the table. And there are ideas that are on the table for addressing the issues. And again, China is at those meetings. So again, I think that that's one of the main reasons why you need the multilateral piece to help address the broader structural issues that we're talking about here.
It sounds to me as if that ought to be one of the major issues that we focus on at our conference on the 4th of August. Before we wrap up, I'd like to have Tom Patterson summarize to some extent the questions that we've been getting from many folks in the affected regions. And we've had people from the Philippines, certainly from Hong Kong, and from a number of other places sending in suggesting questions. And we have somebody now on. Introduce yourself and a brief comment before we go to Tom. Go ahead.
Summertime.
Yes, sorry. Sorry to all of you due to the technical difficulties, and then I got called away for some urgent business, so apologies. I actually am from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and have managed to find myself in this part of the world and become something of a scholar of Vietnam, and so I tend to view these issues through a Vietnamese prism. And I am now struggling to figure out exactly what the path might be for Vietnam. I think Vietnam itself is really struggling with this issue for the reasons that have just been discussed. And it's nice to hear some voices of optimism, or at least vision of the types of things that need to happen. But I am struck by the difficulty in finding ways, and I suppose all means necessary will have to be employed in order to find ways of getting real engagement and constructive engagement. So far, the level of discussion and rhetoric is downright depressing, not to mention scary and irresponsible. And I think it's discussions like these are absolutely vital for finding a way to advance the discussion to a more sane level, because I think, as we'd all agree, the way things have been going contribute to increased tensions, have fueled a regional arms race, and are a great disservice to the region, certainly, but in respects to the broader world. And so, I am particularly interested in hearing views and discussing further the modalities by which we can achieve more meaningful exchanges, because as it stands, so much of what has been said has been one way, not truly a dialogue, but rather a series of monologues combined with types of behaviors on the high seas that are dangerous. I just want to share one thought with you that builds on the point of the last speaker. I recently read an interesting piece in the Jakarta Post that was talking about the space for informal diplomacy, not necessarily the sort of people's diplomacy that people speak wistfully of, perhaps romantically of, but of meetings among states, people, among diplomats, informally, as a way of kickstarting discussions and as a way of reducing the pressure. So in the context of difficulties in engaging, for example, with Beijing, if you had groups in the region and perhaps other interested parties such as the United States and Australia engaging in informal dialogues, even Taiwan for that matter, it is a way, not necessarily the way, of at least stirring the pot and getting some creative discussion going towards the types of imaginative solutions and possibilities that will be a part of any long-term solution to this. So once again, sorry for jumping in late, but thank you for allowing me to share my 2 cents.
Good comment. Certainly beats water cannons. I want to wrap up and turn to Tom Patterson, who's received a lot of suggested questions to set the stage for our conference in August. So Tom, talk to us a little bit about some of those questions, summarize them if you can, and then I would hope that our participants and lots of other people will be thinking over the course of the next month or so as to how we structure our conference in August and how these particular questions can play an important role in our discussion. So Tom, you're on.
So we received a lot of email questions, and I'd like to remind our listeners that even though we're going to have this conference live on August 4th, there will be an online discussion of these issues between now and then at the Boston Global Forum website. So please feel free to participate in that discussion because it will help inform, as will this session, what we talked about on August 4th. The questions were kind of all over the place, but let me introduce 3 of them and see if anyone wants to respond to them. A lot of the questions had to do with China's intentions. And one of the questioners noted that China's leader had recently called for, quote, a new architecture of Asia-Pacific security cooperation that is open, transparent, and equal. And then he went on to say that coercive foreign policies belong to a different age and that they're doomed to failure in the current age. The question is, could this signal a change in China's thinking? And then some other questions came about relating to what the U.S. and Japan can do relative to some of the smaller Asian nations, what kind of support they can give them that wouldn't be interpreted by China as somehow being done to combat China's influence. And then a series of questions around what smaller countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, what role they can play, not just what role China can play in de-escalating the conflict, but what role some of these smaller countries can play in de-escalating the conflict.
That sounds like a pretty good agenda. It does sound pretty good. Let me bring this to a close, folks, first by saying thanks to all of you for joining us today, for giving us, I think, not only lots of good ideas, but a general framework for what we hope we can do in early August. As Tom pointed out, we hope we'll have lots of ongoing discussion online between now and then. Please send us your suggestions, your ideas. We want the August meeting to be a very good one and a constructive one. And I must say I'm encouraged to some extent by what I've heard today, but I think it's so important that we move ahead and attempt to create these institutions so that we do not end up not only in water cannon fights in the middle of the sea, but in ways that can build confidence and, as somebody pointed out, make it unnecessary for us to have an arms race in the Pacific. Arms cost money, precious money. These are resources that ought to be devoted to a lot more constructive things than that. And so I hope that part of this will involve a de-escalation of this ongoing conflict that we seem to be getting in, sufficient reassurance to countries that they can proceed to invest a lot of their resources in some more constructive ways more arms. In any event, our thanks to all of you. Special thanks to those of you who participated and contributed, and I hope we can welcome you back in a month's time to what I hope is going to be a very constructive online conference with lots and lots of good people, and at least the beginning of a series of recommendations that can be extremely helpful. So thanks to all of you, and we look forward to working with you on this and meeting again in about a month's time. Thanks.
Thank you very much. If I may say just a few more words, I quite agree with your side that confidence building process takes a long time. It's a long-term process. At the same time, I'd like to say that multilateral consultations or dialogue should be built up on different layers. By that I mean that we need multilateral consultations at the working level and also middle leadership level, high-level leadership, and also at the summit. So we need several layers, and of course this kind of framework involves all the interested countries and especially China. And I very much appreciate today's discussions like this. But it's always difficult, a bit difficult to talk on the screen. So perhaps we can't meet very often, but perhaps once in a while, once in a year, for instance. I would like to suggest that we meet physically together somewhere. For instance, in Hawaii.
Getting me to come to Tokyo.
You'll be most welcome.
Have a hands-on discussion at that time. And while I don't disagree that it's going to take time, remember what John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. And as I now have celebrated my 80th birthday, that statement is more and more relevant. So I hope we can help the process move ahead with all deliberate speed, because it would be good to see these issues resolved. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. You know, can I?
Mike, I'm going to